Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on when this finds you. Hope everybody's having a great day. But in today's video, I'm gonna attempt to do a video that's longer than I've been doing. One reason I want to do it is to see how my stamina holds up. And secondly, the subject area needs a little bit more time than I've been given with the 20 or so minutes. And even with that amount of time, the amount of time I plan on spending here today, it's really still not sufficient to cover the topic. It is where Black America has always been since slavery ended and where we still are today. However, I'm going to have to tell you that it's not only affecting blacks today, all of society is being impacted. Everything that's been done to black folks in this country has always been an experiment to see if it could actually be implemented among every other ethnic group. And God willing, I'll explain in another video at a later date why and how that has taken place. So the area I'm going to talk about today is economics with a focus on socialism, because we are socialistic in our thinking in Black America. And before I kind of get started, I want to read something that Lenin said. Well, he wrote in a book in 1917. The title of the book is Lenin, The State and Revolution. So I'm going to pull it up right quick. And Lenin said every member of society performing a certain part of socially necessary labor receives a certificate from society that he has done such and such a quantity of work. According to the certificate, he receives from the public stores of articles of consumption, a corresponding quantity of products. Now, what does that sound like right now? What are we hearing right now about social credits? We've heard that it's a system that's already taken place in China. And we're hearing that this government in the United States is starting to come out with it. But what we need to realize is they've actually been working on this since 2010, but they never publicized it. And they're still really not publicizing, but we're hearing about social credit in the Chinese system, but none of our news talking heads over here, I like to call them propagandists, are mentioning anything about the social credit system that the United States government is working on for us. And so we for some reason still assume that those taking part in production are altruistic. But we have to be reminded that compulsory work is generally made one of the conditions of the communist social order. Now, many people are only altruistic with other people's money, not their own. And if you want to test that out for yourself, just ask some of those altruistic people when was the last time they helped somebody with their own money. I have a few quotes that I am going to read during my talking. And one of the authors who wrote on socialism said this in his book, and I didn't write the name down because I have so many books on socialism. But he said the idea of God is the keystone of a perverted civilization. It must be destroyed. The true root of liberty, of equality, of culture is atheism. Man alone is our God. And I'm going to say with little g, our Father, our Judge, our Redeemer, our true home, our law and order. Now, that's the end of the quote. Sadly, if you talk to many atheists, they will almost 100% of the time be socialist or communist in their political thought process. If you think I'm kidding, Look at the people who support a Bernie Sanders or Alexandra Cortez, and then take a look at their life as it regards a relationship with the Father, or if they have a church family they congregate with, or a friend that they discuss spiritual matters with. Tell me what you find. Those with the socialist political mindset are always talking about how they struggle and things need to be better. A lot of them earn at higher levels than most of society, and they still complain about inequality. On top of complaining about inequality, they never take their own dollars of time and give either to anyone less fortunate than them. They are the antithesis of the golden rule. Now, that goes back to what I mentioned earlier about altruism. These types of people always claim to be altruistic as long as somebody else is footing the bill. In the true socialist type economy, two of their goals are to destroy religion and to destroy marriage. And not long ago, there was an article that came out saying that a lot of men today are opting not to marry. And then a few days ago, I saw an article where a woman moved her boyfriend in with her husband and children. This is where we are in society, folks. Now, as far as religion goes, I don't care if it gets destroyed, because we have over 1 billion Christians in the world, but not one single denomination can agree on what the Bible says or what it teaches or what it even means. Now, Christianity enslaved people, Catholicism enslaved people, Islam enslaved people, Mormonism and Judaism, well, let me move on. Yeah, but however, the destruction of marriage is a real serious issue in my opinion. Now, the foundation of any society is the organic family unit. Now, based on what we're seeing in society right now, like I read something one day, it said God created man and woman, and the Democratic Party created the rest of the genders. But the organic family unit consists of a man and woman. Nothing more, nothing different. I don't care what society tries to force upon us as being normal. I mean, I'm about ready to throw my television in the garbage. You know, you watch a TV show, you watch a movie, you got female relationship, male relationship. Even the reality true crime shows. One was on today, and it was about this guy had got killed, and come to find out, he was in a same-sex relationship, and another invited a friend over, and they in a having a three-way party, and ended up killing the guy, and so both of the two survivors got some prison time. And then you got all these pharmaceutical commercials, and these guys are sitting there hugged up and kissing each other, and I mean, society, they're trying to make that normal. That is not normal. What does the Bible say? As in the days of Noah. See, when we're talking about same-sex relationships, we only ever hear most preachers and pastors talk about Sodom and Gomorrah. No, it was more emphasis in the Bible what that practice was going on. It had gotten so bad in Noah's day that God said, I got to destroy this, period. I'm not just going to destroy a couple of cities. I got to destroy all of this, all of it. And, some people say, well, how did the whole earth flood? Well, you got to understand that at one point, all the continents were connected, and it was called a place called Pangea. But I done got way off on my subject matter, because, this stuff they trying to normalize on television is disturbing me. And I used to watch Walker, Texas Ranger. And, I mean, it still comes on 4 to 6 times a day right now. Now, I don't watch it as much as I used to, but I used to watch Walker every time I could. And when they start talking about the new one was going to come out, my sister asked me, she said, you going to watch Walker? I say, well, I'm going to, take a look at, the first maybe a couple of episodes, and, if I get a chance, and, that determine if I'm going to keep watching it. And my sister called me after the first episode. She said, "Brother, don't waste your time." And I'll just leave that there. They tried to reboot old Nash Bridges with a movie to see how it was going to go over. And, came out and Nash was talking to a detective and how does it feel to be the first transvestite detective on the job and all of this stuff. And then there was a show called A Unit about a black ops military group. And they canceled it after 4 seasons. And come to find out, the 5th season, they were going to go into coming out with one of the guys being a homosexual and this and that. And you're just not going to capture certain audiences with content like that. But they're trying to make us accept it as normal. And it's not normal. And so let me get back to what I was talking about. That just rubs me the wrong way when I think about, you got people out here talking about destroying the marriage unit, destroying the family unit, and promoting things that God said ain't right. And, I even saw one guy say God doesn't have a problem with the behavior. He just have a problem if you place the behavior before him. I said, yeah, you're going to burn in hell for that statement, but that's just me. And, because we talk about the book of Leviticus being, a little over the top, but, the book of Romans mentions it too. So morality is under attack. And most of us don't see it. But see, all of this stuff that I'm talking about, even though I kind of got off on that tangent about the relationship, all of this is part of the socialist and communist thought. I wrote in my book, but hey, what do I know? Available at Myron Jones at Gmail, Amazon, and Barnes & Noble, that many promoters of socialism said the objective was slavery, and the best form of slavery was socialism. Now, did we learn anything from Lenin, Marx, and Engels? What about George Fitzhugh? Most of you don't even know who that is. But George Fitzhugh wrote a book, and he said that the slave doesn't have to even worry about what he's going to eat or where he's going to sleep, where he's going to have to live, and even worry about having to take care of himself, because the slave master provides all of that. But the thing that he didn't mention was that the slave gives up one thing, and that's the most important in my opinion, and that one thing is freedom. Christianity said they protested the Catholic Church, but everything the Protestant churches do today actually mirrors the Catholic Church. Christianity said they were going to destroy pagan ideas that had spread throughout, but instead of abolishing them, they actually embraced it. Hey, now, I grew up in Christianity, and that's what I believed in. One day, a person I grew up with asked, did I know what blacks studied before slavery? And at the time, I didn't. But I went on a quest to find out, because a lot of black folks use that question to discount the entire Bible. Now, our ancestors actually had the Bible long before the Europeans arrived on the scene. And, I've mentioned in a couple other videos, it was called something called the Way, W-A-Y. And the people who studied the Bible were called followers of the Way. I mentioned in another video where the first time they used the word Christian, in the book of Acts, and but I'm not here to talk about all that either again, because go back and listen to the other videos. But Christianity embraced pagan ideas. And one of the reasons, let me say it, that's one of the reasons the Europeans separated the men from the women and the children. Because fathers would not be able to pass on biblical knowledge. And then what the Europeans turned around and did was gave our ancestors a perverted version of the Bible, and they called it Christianity to make it sound Christ-like. And just so we know, Christ was not his title or his name. Now, why am I talking about these things along with socialism? Because the socialist New World Order is going to require your allegiance to something false. And if you've been learning something false all your life, it's going to be much easier to deceive and manipulate you. Socialism wants no God, no family, no freedom, and no standards of morality. Now, take a look at this society that we live in and check it against those four areas I just mentioned. I don't care which book you read on socialism that tries to put a positive spin on it. Every last one of the authors says you have to destroy religion or God, the family unit, and individual thought. And the objective behind socialism is to make all of these disappear. But those who say they believe in socialism, that they say would, I guess, believe socialism would be a better system, have never truly studied it. They listen to their lying politicians who say it's a good thing. Bernie Sanders, a perfect example, has been in political office over 40 years, I believe since 1981, if I'm not mistaken. And the only person Bernie Sanders has enriched is Bernie Sanders. And don't come talking to me about no democracy or Democrats, because the Democratic Party, the Socialist Party, and the Communist Party aligned with each other a few years ago publicly. I say publicly because they actually united in the 60s, around the same time the Civil Rights Act was signed by that black, hating, white, communist, black slave master, LBJ, that blacks still love today. The Democratic Party has always been advocates of socialism and slavery. Who do you think the slaveholders was? What party do you think all your slave masters belonged to back then? The Republican Party didn't come until a few years before slavery ended. So your Democrats were all slave masters, which means your Democrats, no, I ain't gonna say all your Democrats are slave masters, but all your slave masters were Democrats. How about that? That's like saying all black people vote Democrat. It just ain't true. But Democratic Party, the party, and a lot of y'all, 96% of us, are supporting the party. But the Democratic Party has always been about socialism and slavery. Now, before socialism and communism actually became terms in the 1800s, it was actually called slavery or feudalism. See, we don't hear much about feudalism nowadays. I would go out on a limb and say they don't even mention it in the schools anymore. I think we came across the term a couple of times when I was in school, and it was glossed over like it wasn't important. But it was feudalism. There was a guy named Belfort Bax that was a member of the Socialist League during his life. And hold on, he got a quote I want to read you. Let me try to grab that right quick. I just got so much stuff, it runs together after a while. Okay, Belfort Bax said this. I should observe that we are not concerned with the civilized man, but with the socialized man, because that man enjoys collectivism, because collectivism goes back to primitive conditions. Did you hear that? They want y'all to go the New World Order. I did a video sometime back talking about the New World Order is nothing but the old world order coming back in, and that's primitive living. And I know sometimes people listen to me and they think I'm crazy. And you ask my wife and my sisters, they'll tell you, y'all right. But each of the authors who have written works on socialism in a positive light says that the education of children must be removed from the parents. Now, the Bible I read says over in Proverbs 22:6 that we should teach children how they should live and they will remember it all their life. And so the Bible, which socialists want to destroy, says for you to teach your children, and socialists said they want to take teaching away from you. Now, one book even actually said that the core of the matter is to make motherhood a business, and so that it's arranged and paid for by the state. And the reasoning behind that was to root out motherhood in the family. See, they want to make sure you as a parent have no control or input into your children's lives. Because see, what you don't understand, when the government came out and created marriage certificates and you signed a marriage certificate, you told the government when you signed a marriage certificate that you actually gave control of your children to the state and not yourself. And see, I'm not here to talk about that. But they want to destroy whatever thing resembles a family unit. Then they want to create these family units. I mean, look at what we're dealing with in society. You got men trying to look like women, and then you got women growing beards and stuff so they can look like men. And then these women with beards are calling themselves getting pregnant, and then they want to tell us a man got pregnant. No, you ain't gonna change biology. But that's what they're doing. And so they want to destroy the family. And, sadly, a lot of people are supporters of socialism, communism, and democracy have no idea what they're actually supporting. But the very lives they live fall right in line with the predetermined plan put in place over a century ago. There was another socialist named Edward Carpenter. And he actually wrote a pamphlet on marriage. And let me read that to you. Where is it? He talked about marriage in a free society. And he said he condemned a marriage that includes one man and one woman. And he said that he believed that when a woman married a man, she became a slave to the man, and this should not be so. Now, I'm gonna agree and say there have been lots of men who lorded over their wives with iron fists, especially if they were slave masters. Most of the marriages where this took place normally had a European head of household. Most people don't understand that because of the maltreatment of European women by European men. The feminist movement started to rise up in the 1800s. The white women could never get their movements to catch on for almost 100 years, so they went to the black women in the 1950s. And then they asked the black women to join their movement to escape their husband's oppression. White women wanted black women to join their feminist movement so the white women could escape their white husband's oppression. I mean, look how they treated and manipulated our black women, and our black women fell for it. Now, once the black women joined their movement, it finally caught hold, and once the movement ended, black women were now without the fathers and husbands of their children in the home, and those slave oppressed white women who said that their husbands were domineering somehow managed to stay married to those same domineering husbands. And sadly, our black organic family units have not recovered. These people believe for socialism to thrive, they had to destroy religion, marriage, and the family. I don't know how many times I can tell you that. Look at our society today. They believe if a man and woman marry, their chance of owning property actually increases. And one of the things they advocate against in socialism is private ownership of anything. Why do you think divorces are so easy to obtain now? You have socialists running every level of the political spectrum right now. Democrats are full-fledged socialists and Republicans are socialist light. Why do you think it's getting more difficult for people on both sides of the political spectrum? Sure, you can elect one mayor or congressman or senator and think it's going to change. Nope. Whole system from top to bottom needs an enema. I mean, you got to vote everybody out. Even the few good ones in there. You got to vote everybody out and start over. There was a guy named Hepworth Dixon. And Hepworth had this to say: the very first conception of a socialist state shall prevent men and women from falling into selfish family groups. Family life is always at war with socialistic life. Y'all socialists hear that? Dixon also said that if you had private property, you would have your own personal goods, and that is at odds with socialism because it has to have a community of children and a community of wives. He said you cannot have socialism without introducing communism into the picture. Now, that's the end of Dixon's quote. But get this one. Lots of promoters of the socialism thought process says that the Roman Catholic Church agreed with their ideals. Well, I guess that isn't too far-fetched since they believed in slavery and tried to have that part of their church history script from the history books. Now, go and read about old Pope Nicholas V and the slave trade from that papal bull in 1452. Socialists believe that man has a selfish nature and that needs to be removed from man. Now, let me divert for a moment because some of you may be wondering why I would be talking about socialism on a channel primarily talking about black issues. Well, first of all, like I mentioned earlier, many blacks have socialist tendencies and leanings and don't even realize they think that way. They think socialism and communal living are the same thing. Nope. Socialism and communism are more in line with each other. A communal system of economics means the people voluntarily agree to live and do business among each other without exploitation. Being exploited, I should say. I guess that would flow a little better. Socialism and communism both of them actually exploit people to increase the wealth of those in control of proletariat, as Karl Marx called them in the Communist Manifesto. You know, the proletariat are what Marx called the common people, the poor, huddled masses. Now, it's a sad situation that for years the socialists and communists have actually taught us that capitalism exploits the people. Pure capitalism doesn't exploit the people. Crony capitalism does. Since the exception of the Constitution in this country has never had pure capitalism. Slavery is socialistic and communistic in nature. Isn't it amazing that the more Europeans came to this country, the slavery situation kept expanding? That wasn't capitalism, even though many blacks say it was because they said black people were the capital. That system has the system in this country has always been a hybridized system of economics in which Europeans took the worst elements of each economic system, morphed it into one and called it capitalism. But see, capitalism wasn't even a thing until the 1800s. But feudalism had been a thing for centuries. Feudalism slid right into socialism and communism, not capitalism. Now that I've given you that quick history, let me get back to blacks and socialism and communism. And that's why I said earlier, I was going to have to talk at a little bit more length, like I said, one, to see if my stamina would hold up, and two, because there's no way I could have did this in 25 minutes. And I'm looking at 28 minutes now, but there's no way I could have got everything in this amount of time. That's why I needed to talk, see if I could talk a little bit longer. But in the pamphlet or book, The Ugly Truth about the NAACP, the writer says this: none of the organizations which have exploited the race issue in this country has ever had the welfare of the Negro people at heart. They have seized upon this issue as a convenient front for their more nefarious activities, and as one with which they could dupe naive, do-gooders, fuzzy-minded intellectuals, misguided clergymen, and radical journalists to be their pawns. Now, that's the end of that quote. The reason this is important is because the NAACP was founded by a group of white socialists. The National Urban League was founded by socialists. W.E.B. Du Bois and William Monroe Trotter were socialists. The NAACP was never founded to help blacks with any cause. Yeah, they threw a few court cases in there, the Scottsboro Boys and a couple of others that I can't think of off the top of my head, but that's just to make it seem like they were really in place to help black people. But it was never founded to help blacks with any cause. Isn't it amazing? They've never talked about reparation. Isn't it amazing? They never hold any politicians' feet to the fire on the things they've told us over the years. Isn't it amazing? They've been around for over 100 years and we still dealing with um, police brutality against blacks. I mean, if they were black organization fighting for the rights of blacks, wouldn't you think their name would be all over the place? Other than every time you see an incident, you see them out there trying to enrich their lifestyle. It's all about money. We're gonna economize this death so we can get paid. I'm not here to talk about that either. But the NAACP was founded, a unit supposedly founded to, I guess, get blacks behind a goal using race to overthrow the system and promote communism. Now, James Weldon Johnson, who was a member of the NAACP, I think he wrote that song "Lift Every Voice and Sing." But he said that the goal of the NAACP was to gain political seats for blacks. So the NAACP, and I've mentioned that before in other videos, the NAACP was hoping to get more blacks into positions of power in order to promote the system of economics of the socialist founders of the NAACP, which was communism. W.E.B. Du Bois was actually a lawyer, and he actually defended communist spies Julius and Ethel Rosenberg and other imprisoned leaders of the Communist Party in the United States. And in 1953, he was actually awarded the International Peace Prize by the Communist Front World Peace Council in recognition of his participation in the sponsorship of the communist dominated World Peace Conference that they had been holding for 4 years at that point. And sadly, this is who black folks chose to follow instead of the business and entrepreneurial minded Booker T. Washington, because they said Washington was too soft on civil rights. Now, let me give you a little black background on Washington. Washington was actually financing all of the civil rights cases behind the scenes, and it's amazing that he was said to be too soft on it. But Du Bois never supported anything in defense of black folks. Booker T. Washington actually encouraged business ownership, and he funded those court cases defending blacks, and Du Bois encouraged getting away from business ownership and asking white or Jewish men for jobs. Based on how we still function today, we still love the philosophy of Du Bois. Now, how can I say that? Because we still think a business owned by a non-black is more valuable and viable than one owned by a black. We still encourage the old mindset: go to school, get a good education so we can get a good job, instead of let's teach our youth a trade and encourage them that business ownership is freedom and jobs are nothing more than a slavery or socialist system. Now, I read something earlier today, and it was, let me see if I can remember how it went. It said, I got good grades so I could go to college and get a loan, student loan, so I could then graduate and get a job and pay off my student loans. Ain't that about what it boiled down to? Now, I heard a guy say years ago that jobs are great, or a great temporary situation until you can start your business. Now, some years back, one of my cousins called and asked if I knew what she could do to start her an internet-based business. I actually told her what I was involved in, and she flat out told me that she wanted nothing to do with me in business. But she called and asked me for help and then slapped me in the face by saying she wanted nothing to do with anything I was involved with. So why would you call me? Why ask for my help? Now, when we've been taught the slavery issue, we're always going to be taught a slanted version. And because history has painted abolitionists as friends to blacks during slavery. Now, some of them were pure and righteous in the help that they offered. However, there were a lot of them that were actually socialists in their thinking as well, and they were using their help of, I guess, their help of benefiting runaway slaves as a precursor to getting blacks to join their communist movements down the road. Now, Roy Wilkins, and I've mentioned Roy Wilkins before as it regarded the White Eisenhower civil rights bills of 1957 and 1960, and how Roy Wilkins criticized Eisenhower because he said Eisenhower didn't do a whole lot. But at the time Eisenhower wrote those bills and signed those bills, the parties were controlled by Democrats, and he said Eisenhower didn't offer enough. So the Democrats were in charge at the time, with the exception of Ike being the president, and Roy Wilkins said Ike didn't do enough. But, that's just the way we think. But Roy Wilkins was what they call the executive secretary of the NAACP. And I'm going to read a quote from him that he made he made on June 17, 1936. And he said, it was made to the New York Daily Worker, which was the official publication of the Communist Party in this country at the time. And he said, as attaching greatest significance to the 1936 National Communist Party Convention, and stating that the Communist Party's racial program had had a very wholesome effect in the United States. He was further quoted by the Daily Worker on June 15, 1949, as boasting that he had voted in the New York City election that year for Negro communist Benjamin J. Davis. Now, when you got all of these black folks supporting communism, and these are the folks that we're following behind, why do you think we're so messed up in the head as a people? Now, we've been told nothing but great things about old Thurgood Marshall. And I've told you before that his son was actually on the board of directors or something at the private prison uh, industrial complex in this country. So he was making money off getting black folks locked up. But, that's the son. But the daddy was a member of the executive board of the Communist Front National Lawyers Guild. He was listed as a member of the National Committee of the Communist Front International Juridical Association. And that association actually defended communists and consistently followed the Communist Party line, if that makes sense to you. There was another guy. I'm going to pull up the notes because I don't want to mess this stuff up. There was another black guy who's a director of public relations named Henry Lee Moon. And he was what they call NAACP's propaganda chief. And he was actually listed as a member of the Communist Washington Bookshop in the National Negro Congress, which was the Communist Front movement in the United States among Negroes. He had actually written a book called The Balance of Power, The Negro Vote. And he was actually praised by the Daily Worker, and he was listed in 1949 as a nominee to be the commentator for the Subversive and Communist Voice of Freedom Committee. And his wife, and Langston Hughes, they actually traveled to the former Soviet Union to actually make a movie titled Black and White. And, I'm not even sure they teach about the former Soviet Union or USSR anymore in school. So, I just want you to think about that for a minute. They traveled to a communist country at the time to do a black and white movie. Do some research and figure out which people were the advocates of communism. Let me give you a hint. Find out who's trying to move to the Ukraine and where they're trying to move from, and you'll have your answer. But don't say it out loud because you will call anti-schematic. Dr. James J. McClendon. I'm getting ready to give you a few names. You might know a few, you might know all, but I'm gonna give you these names. Dr. James J. McClendon was the president of Detroit NAACP. A. Philip Randolph, Mary McLeod Bethune, Pastor William Lloyd Imes, Bishop William Jacob Walls, Lottie Pearl Mitchell, Willard Saxby Townsend, Grace Baxter Henderson, Earl B. Dickerson, Roscoe Dungy, Channing Tobias, William H. Hasty, Hubert Thomas Delaney, Benjamin Mays, Robert G. Weaver, Bell G. Gallagher, and the boy, actually, just to name a few that you may have heard of, were all charged with un-American activities. Now, for blacks today, un-American activities means something totally different than it did back then. Back then, un-American activities meant communists. And that's just a small snippet. There's a whole list of black folks that were charged with un-American activities. There were also many whites charged with it at the same time. So I don't want you to think just blacks. But it's amazing that those whites were the ones that these guys and women and other blacks were taking their instructions from. Now, when Joseph Stalin died, the boy had this to say about it. Let all Negroes, Jews, and foreign born who have suffered in America from prejudice and intolerance remember Joseph Stalin. Now, in all of my study, I've never heard Stalin ever referred to as a champion for blacks. Now, maybe I missed something along the way. You know, that's possible because there's no way I can come across everything. It's just too much. It's too many years. There's no way any of us ever know everything. Now, E. Franklin Frazier had some communist ties, although he was never charged with any what they call un-American activities at the time. And even in my research, I never came across him being charged with any. NAACP actually picketed an event in Chicago that was actually going against communist propaganda. And there was a guy named Foster William Jr. Well, that was a member at one time of the Communist Party. And he actually testified before the House Un-American Activities Committee. And this is what he had to say. The Communist Party very sneakily manipulates the Negro people for their own purposes. That's the end of the quote. I mentioned Roy Wilkins earlier and his support for communist activities. I mean, I know, some of you ain't gonna like this, but civil rights champ MLK was a communist sympathizer, if not a full-fledged communist. Now, in his book, Bearing the Cross, he said this. Now, if you don't have the book, go ahead and get it. I do have it. It's not a small book, so I know that's why most of us shy away from it. But in this book, he says, we have moved into a new era, which must be an era of revolution. The whole structure of American life must be changed. We are engaged in a class struggle. I mean, that sounds great. That sounds grand. That sounds noble. But just so you know, that statement came right out of a communist handbook. Now, before I move on, you need to hear this, because this kind of goes along the same lines. And here's another quote. We have entered a new phase in the struggle against racism and capitalism in the United States. Now, that sounds almost exactly like what MLK said. Where did that come from? That's from the Black Lives.
Alrighty, sorry about that. I'm gonna still do this in the same night to get the video out together. I don't want to do a part 1 and 2, so hopefully I can get these two spliced together in one video. But before I got cut off on my laptop, I said I ran out of memory. I was talking about Black Lives Matter, and what they mentioned sounded exactly like what MLK had said. And it came from, like I said, a lack of a better term, which is the Socialist Manifesto. Now, it's no secret that the Black Lives Matter movement has Marxist tendencies. And when we talk about Marxism, we're talking about Karl Marx, who is the father of communism, who came out with the book Communist Manifesto, although he was actually a capitalist. So, back to what I was talking about. There was a guy, Reverend Uriah Fields, and he was actually MLK's secretary at one point. And in 1968, this is what Reverend Fields had to say. King helps to advance communism. He is surrounded with communists. This is a major reason why I severed my relationship with him during the 50s. He is soft on communism. I don't believe that he's a communist or a Christian for that matter. Now, many blacks will actually say King wasn't a communist. Now, this is not Reverend Fields talking. Many blacks are going to say King was not a communist. But what many blacks don't know is the communists actually wrote his speeches, and he was actually pictured in 1957 in a meeting at the Communist Training School, Highlander Folk School. Now, in that picture, and you can find it on the internet, just type in a search mode, King at the Communist School. And he's actually sitting with several well-known communists. Now, one of King's closest associates, which was Andrew Young, and we revere him right today, he was an active communist. There was a black lady named Julia Brown, and I first came across her in, I think, the book Behold the Pale Horse. And I couldn't find any more information on it at the time, and I did some more research and found out a little bit more about her. But Julia Brown was actually used by the FBI to infiltrate communist meetings around the country. And she actually told a congressional subcommittee that while she was a member of the Communist Party, she knew MLK to be closely connected with the Communist Party. Now, she was black. And on the lecture circuit, she told audience that King was the hero of American communism. And she said herself that the people she was closely associated with in the Cleveland area were continually being asked to raise funds for Martin Luther King's activity. Now, this is a direct quote from her. Let me get that for you. She said, Mr. King was one of the worst enemies my people ever had. And in June of 1979, she testified at a Senate Judiciary Committee and concluded her statement to the committee. If this measure is passed honoring Martin Luther King, we may as well take down the stars and stripes that flies over this building and replace it with a red flag. Now, that was in the quote. King rejected any possibility that there were communists in the civil rights movement and that they actually influenced the movement that he led. Now, I also have a video on the channel, Civil Rights is Wrong. And I talk about how we actually went backwards with the civil rights movement. And then we started figuring out who was financing the civil rights movement. You understand why we went backward. And it plays right along in line with what I talked about, the NAACP, the Urban League, and all this other stuff. And so there was a guy named Michael Lastly. And he was actually the chairman of the Communist Party at the time. And he held a press conference in 1967. And this is what he said. King knows what's going on. He has allowed himself to be utilized by the Communist Party. King willingly enters into an alliance with the Communist Party. Mr. King receives support from organizations and individuals that are tied to the Communist Party. He knows what is happening, and so does James Bevel. Gus Hall, another top communist, and he actually admitted that communist leaders consult with and advise top Negro leaders in their civil rights campaigns. Members of the Communist Party are very active in all the Negro organizations engaged in the civil rights struggle. Carl Prussian, an FBI counter-spy, actually revealed in an affidavit placed into the congressional record that King was a member of over 60 Communist Front organizations. He swore that King had either been a member of or wittingly supported and took support from over 60 Communist Fronts, individuals, and or organizations which give aid to espouse communist causes. He added, I further swear and attest to the fact that at each and every one of the aforementioned meetings, one Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. was always set forth as the individual whom communists should look and rally around in the communist struggle on the many racial issues. Into that quote. Now, in 1966, MLK actually was talking to his staff one day, and this is what he told them. You can't talk about solving the economic problem of the Negro without talking about billions of dollars. You can't talk about ending the slums without first saying profit must be taken out of slums. You're really tampering and getting on dangerous ground because you are messing with both ends. You're messing with captains of industry. Now, this means that we are treading in difficult water because it really means that we are saying that something is wrong with capitalism. There must be a better distribution of wealth. and maybe America must move toward a democratic socialism. End of quote. Now, maybe that's the reason black folks rally behind black champion Bernie Sanders. You know, he's always described himself as a democratic socialist, which means he is nothing but a socialist with a better sounding name. We don't even know that Francis Bellamy was a socialist. Who was Francis Bellamy, you ask? Bellamy actually wrote the Pledge of Allegiance. You know, the thing we teach our children to start the day off with instead of prayer, Bible reading, and honoring God. We also know that another socialist named Catherine Bates wrote America the Beautiful. Now, if you can find some of MLK's papers, and in 1953, he wrote, "Communism is one of the most important issues of our day." Now, MLK studied communism on his own when he was a student at Crozier Theological Seminary. And that was in the year 1949. And I mean, there's nothing wrong with studying economic systems. I'm not saying that at all. But he studied it and then started advocating for it. You know, now that's a whole different issue. I studied it, and I don't want no parts of it. I studied socialism. I don't want no part of it. I studied feudalism. I don't want no parts of it. I studied Marxism. I don't want no parts of it. Now, he actually wrote to Coretta Scott when they first started dating, the first summer they were dating, that he was more socialistic in economic theory than capitalism. Now, he kept preaching against communism publicly, but privately he kept supporting their ideas. What does the book James say about a double-minded man? He's unstable. Now, I mentioned earlier that King's speeches were written by a communist, and I mentioned it in previous videos that his speeches were written by a communist named Stanley Levinson. And what we also weren't taught was the Kennedy administration told MLK to discontinue his relationship with Levinson. And King did it for a couple of years, but then they got back together. And in 1965, I believe that was 1963, when the Kennedy administration told him he needed severe ties with Stanley Levinson. So in 65, they got back together. And so you can see how that worked out. Sorry about my chair. But a guy named J.T. Whitson, he was a doctor, and he wrote a pamphlet entitled "The Advantages Socialism Offers to the Negro" in 1913. A guy named Peter H. Clark, according to Herbert Gutman, and many of you need to look up Herbert Gutman, Guttman, and get some of his thought process. But according to Herbert Gutman, Peter Clark was the first black to join the Socialist Party in 1877. And then there would be three more that would join the party in 1901, which would actually, they said including W.E.B. Du Bois, but then there's conflicting information, say W.E.B. Du Bois joined the party in 1911 and then left it in 1912 because he wanted to support, and he did support, Woodrow Wilson. So I don't know which year he joined, but I know his thought process was socialistic regardless of what year he joined the party. He was a socialist through and through. And the NAACP was growing by leaps and bounds after the death. I mean, it was growing already because they had picked up, the NAACP had picked up that failed black organization that Du Bois and Tribe started. And I can't even think of the name of it right now. But so they actually got some blacks to follow them into the NAACP. And once Booker T. Washington died, it really took off. But after Washington died, see, right before Washington died, he invited Marcus Garvey up to the United States. And so that's the problem they ran into after Washington died. He started the UNIAA. And it was also growing by leaps and bounds. And when Garvey came with his philosophy, blacks started choosing Garvey's organization over the NAACP. And because of this, the NAACP was starting to hurt financially because the money that was once being donated to the NAACP was now being given to the UNIA. So this caused a major problem for the NAACP. And if you study and know a little history about that, you can find the campaigns that the NAACP led with Du Bois at the front. And they started a campaign talking about Garvey must go. See, Garvey and Booker T. Washington had similar philosophies, but Garvey was a little bit more radical than Booker T. Washington, if you want to call it that. And so Garvey, because of what the NAACP and Du Bois did, had to actually leave the United States after that slander campaign. And the NAACP swooped right on in and grabbed those black minds once again. And see, one of the issues Garvey had when he visited the United States was what he called a supposed Negro organization, was all the white faces or near white faces sitting at every NAACP office he visited. And he asked, how can this be a Negro organization and Negroes not even controlling it? Let me get this quote from Malcolm X right quick. And if you understand what Malcolm X started teaching after he came from Mecca, his whole philosophy had changed. It wasn't black versus white anymore because he saw all those different ethnicities when he went to Mecca, visit Mecca. And Malcolm X came back with a totally different thought process. It wasn't black versus white no more. He still promoted black interests, but he said everybody was his brother if they were trying to move in the same direction. And he said that could be black or white, it don't matter. Because he really didn't want black people around him that weren't heading in that direction. But this is something he said. The American white man has so thoroughly brainwashed the black man to see himself as only a domestic civil rights problem. Since the Civil War's freedom, the black man has gone down so many fruitless paths. White society hates to hear anybody, especially a black man, talk about the crime the white man has perpetrated on the black man. End of quote. Now, why did I mention all this? Because we need to understand how we got so socialist in our thinking and behavior. We've been led by men and women who set themselves up as champions for the race, and right today we still haven't recovered. W.E.B. Du Bois would apologize for what he did to destroy Washington and Garvey and their philosophies in the 60s. He apologized in the 60s. But by then, it was way too late. The damage had been done to black America. And by the time he apologized, King and his crew were fanning the flames again under the guise of civil rights. Now, it can be real easy to see why we embrace socialism. Many of us were taught that Jesus was a socialist based on the way he lived. And as I mentioned earlier, communal living and socialism are not the same thing. Let me upset a few of you. Since the Catholic Church in some respects embraced and promoted socialism, the image they presented of Jesus was probably a socialist, Caesar Borgia, the Pope's son. But the Messiah wasn't a socialist. You see, socialist writers have said that socialism is a system founded on justice and truth. Now, I mentioned earlier that socialists have always wanted to destroy religion. One socialist writer said that socialism is a heartfelt, soul-inspiring religion, resting upon the love of God, and that it seeks to improve the mental, physical, and spiritual levels of mankind in order for each person to live a better life in all areas where all of us would be equal. Now, I mentioned earlier that they said they wanted to destroy religion. They wanted nothing to do with God. But now you got another socialist writer, because see, that's how they use that to infiltrate the church. See, we don't understand the playbook. Keep telling y'all the playbook don't change. Now, let me ask a question. Take socialism out of the picture. Look at every individual you know. Every individual. I ain't going to say every individual you know. Every individual in your close inner circle. Maybe the 5 or 10 or 15 people you spend the most time with, if you had that many. But just look around the 5 that you spend the most of the time with. Each one of us got 10 we might hang with every now and then. Well, I don't. That's on purpose. But are all of you on the same spiritual level? Based on your learning, are all of you on the same mental level? Looking at our physical characteristics, are we all the same height and weight? Are all athletes trained the same way for their respective sports? Does a doctor have the same training as a school teacher? Does a lawyer have the same education as a truck driver? If these answers are no, how are we going to all be equal? Does a sprinter have the same capacity to run a mile or two at the same pace as one who runs long distances? Do men and women use the bathroom the same way? Well, today that's debatable. See, socialism leaves out all of this when it speaks of equality. What socialism means when it says equality is that all of us need to live at a predetermined equal level of economics where all of us barely get by. What do you think the social credit system is? Why does the government want to replace fiat currency with digital currency? Because they can't track fiat currency, but a computer allows them to see each and every transaction you conduct with any and everybody. Some people are so small-minded and conditioned and they're thinking that they are saying that, well, we already use cards to do much of our business anyway, so what's the problem? How do you pay the guy who cuts your grass? I know a lot of you using, apps. But how do you pay a child in the neighborhood who may pull your trash can up or down for you? What if you just want to bless a child or grandchild with some cash? The government wants oversight into all of this. I used the Zelle app one time and I uninstalled it. See, the more convenient the system makes it to do transactions using money apps, the more the system believes we want what they're trying to implement. Socialists believe that the self-interest must give way to what they term love for one another. You see how they say stop thinking about yourself in the name of others? When you get on an airplane, regardless of which airline it is, they all have the same instructions before the plane takes off. What do they say? Should we lose cabin pressure and an oxygen mask drop down? Put your own oxygen mask on first if you are traveling with someone who needs assistance, so that you don't compromise not just their life, but yours as well. Suppose you get the mask on your child, but you don't get yours on before something happens, before you can't breathe anymore. See, not loving self is one of the major pitfalls of society, and that's why suicide is so rampant right now. In this country alone, there's a suicide attempt every 27 seconds. Every 27 seconds. Now, one writer who insisted that Christ was a socialist said that he came and was born among the working class, not the rich, to show others that riches were not to be desired. Something your pastor never told you was that Christ had a 24-hour treasurer with him named Judas. Christ had so much money, or I say the Messiah had so much money, he had to keep one person with him just to handle his money. Get you some of that, socialist. Now, this writer also said that our labor should be free and not compensated. See, this person has a true misunderstanding of labor. The Messiah didn't even work people for free. And nowhere is that more plain than in Matthew chapter 20, I believe. The parable of the vineyard, or the parable of the laborer, whatever they call it. Y'all know what I'm talking about. I think it's in Matthew 20. You see, advocates of socialism say that in order for socialism to take place, industry has to be taken over by the socialist government. Well, look at your government. What does your government look like? What is your government promoting? What is your government putting on you? Right now in the city of Houston, I was reading the other day, you got all the Democrats in charge down here wanting to increase property taxes to pay for the Harris County health system, because they say the Harris County health system is running a $45 million deficit. And the only two Republicans that are in a position to vote refuse to show up for the meetings. They say they ain't voting on it. So our county judge down here is trying to make another judge force them to come to the meeting and force their hand to vote. And one of the guys, one of the Republicans, he said we shouldn't be taxing the people like that, increasing the taxes on the people like that, when the Harris County health system has a $1 billion fund sitting over in the unused reserves. And the Harris County health CEO says they don't have $1 billion. So what they're saying is, let's tax the people and we're going to take this money and put it in our pockets. That's what they're saying. But black women down here was always talking about, we got that woman of color in the judge's seat, the highest judge's seat in the city. Hey, based on what they teaching in these universities now, you can be dumber than a bricks under a box of rocks and still get a job as highly regarded. But that's what we're dealing with. That's socialists in charge. Socialists are trying to tax you to poverty. And they're doing a great job of it because most of your income, about 45% of your income, is going to some taxation in one form or another. So industry, as I mentioned, would have to be taken over by a socialist government. Well, we can check that off the list. What do we have in place right now with all the regulations that have been put in place by the government? Did I say all regulations are bad? No, you didn't hear me say that. Because there have been some unfair business practices by men in every industry. But at what point do we ask who gets to decide what's fair or unfair? Take those NBA players a few years back who felt the owner should share more of their profits with them. The business owner took all the risks to build a team. So why should he or she give more of their profit to the employees? Because that's all NBA players are, is employees or employees. Employees have no control, but those NBA players had socialistic thinking. And at the end of the day, they settled for the exact same offer the owners made them in the first place. If you don't own, you don't control, and that's the bottom line. If you don't own, you don't control. Even if you figure out a more efficient way to do business while with that company, whatever company you work with, if you find a more efficient way to do something that the company does, they want you to turn over your ideas so they can increase their profit. And because many people are not entrepreneurial minded, they sell their ideas for scraps. Under the socialist thought process, the great utopia would not allow for unemployment because everyone would have a job. And it will be compulsory, not voluntary. Remember I mentioned earlier about women and children becoming community property? They would allow each person to choose which industry they wanted to work in, but each person would have to work. And one writer even said that although a doctor would actually require more training, his income should be equal to every other person in society. Now, a lot of doctors right today are fleecing the medical system to enhance their income and lifestyle, and I know this from personal experience, but I'm not here to talk about that issue. I wrote in my book about something called philanthropy, and it's Charles, is it Curry? I don't remember the guy's name. First name is Charles, I remember that much. But he created something called philanthropy. And what it is a socialist utopia of living. And in this type of system, the community shares everything. And if you want an idea of what a philanthropy is, just look at your military barracks, look at condominiums, look at hotels, look at apartments. And all of these will be along the lines of philanthropy, where you got to share everything. I know a lot of apartments and, condos are privately owned or whatever, but it's the structure. But military barracks, you share laundry room, you share shower. Hotel, well, your individual rooms have showers, but if you want to wash clothes, you got to go to a shared laundry room. Apartments, a lot of them are coming with washers and dryers now, but a lot of them still have, pay-per-use units for the whole complex. But those are along the lines of philanthropy. Those are what philanthropy look like: shared common eating areas, shared parks, shared pool, shared amenities. You know, if you look at your hotel, you know, you have one dining area that everybody at the hotel has to share. And if you really paid attention with the number of hotel rooms they have in a hotel, there's no way everybody can come down and eat at the same time. You know what else it sounds like? Prisons. But as blacks, you know, we picked up on the socialist thought process, and everybody else is making capitalism work for them, their families, their communities, their neighborhoods. But we keep running to our politicians, especially the black ones, who are socialistic in their thought process. The more college education you get, the more your viewpoints get slanted towards socialistic thought processes. Now, practically all colleges and universities in this country now are socialistic in what they're teaching, even the so-called Christian ones. I got this firsthand when I went to speak at one of the major universities over in West Texas a few years back. And while I was in town, I went to meet with one of the advisors of the nearby Christian university. And he wanted to bring me in to speak, and I told him I would be in town on a certain date. And he asked me to stop by and visit with him. And he and I talked, and he said, Mr. Jones, don't let the Christian label on the school fool you. We're just as bad as every other university. And don't even get me started on seminaries. And I mean, I'm laughing. I mean, I'm having a good time, but I'm trying to share some serious information with you. Now, we can say we don't follow socialistic thought, but I would charge you to look at every economic indicator and look at the ranking based on income by every ethnic group in this country and tell me who is in last place in every category except spending. If socialism says we should be equal as a whole, we're equally poor. And that's why we scrape the bottom of the economic barriers I stated on a video some time back. We are socialists in church because we keep believing the lies coming from the pulpit that we should give to the church and the pastor until it hurts. And it hurts, all right. It hurts us and our families and the future of our family. We teach our children that tithing is mandatory, although the Bible is pretty clear on that subject. So the cycle of poverty never gets better because we are taught to give to God and He will bless us. Pastors and good Christians tell us to tithe to help the poor. But in the black community, we continue to see the poor and homeless surrounding the church that we give it to, living right outside His doors. Ironically, they tell us to give to the church, to tithe to the church, to help the poor. But Proverbs 19 and 17 says for us, not a church. Well, not Proverbs 19 to say not a church. But Proverbs 19:17 says for us to give directly to the poor, and God's going to repay us because that's how we pay God. The Bible says helping the poor is like giving a loan to God. The Bible says helping the poor is like giving God a loan. The Bible says when we help the poor, we're lending to God. I don't know how much that has to be emphasized. I need to keep beating it in your head until you get it. There's one pastor I listen to up out of Philadelphia. And my new buddy, Daryl Jones, know who I'm talking about. And Daryl and I are not related. Jones ain't my real last name anyway. But that's the name that I was giving my stepfather. And but it's not a name I'm proud of, but I got it. But anyway, Daryl Jones knew who I was talking about. But the pastor up out of Philadelphia said, you don't have any business paying no pastor at no church. He asked, why should your pastor live a better lifestyle than you? Why should his children attend private schools and yours attend public schools? Why should the pastor's wife dress better than your wife? And why does the pastor and his family get to go on vacation while you sit at home? And he said, you sacrifice everything you work for to support someone who's lazy. Now, this pastor said he and his wife have a business. He said he and his wife have a business. He said he and his wife have a business that they own, flipping homes and doing the work themselves. Now, not only is he supporting his own family like the Bible said he should, He has something to pass to his children. See, the only thing these guys standing in the pulpit that are fleecing the people are passing on is the opportunity for their sons or daughters or wives to follow in their footsteps when they pass on, for them to keep fleecing the church. That's why you don't, only thing you ever see grow in the community is the church. They build bigger buildings, but the homeless and poor are still outside the doors. And they'll put those big buildings right in the heart of the highest poverty-stricken black communities in whatever city you in. But we're supposed to help the poor. What did the Messiah say? You help the poor. You help the widow. You help the hungry. You help the fatherless. Are we seeing that in our churches? No, because we're socialistic in our thinking. The church is keeping us equally poor. I don't care who get mad about me saying it. Stop tithing and put your tithing dollars toward your debt and see how things change for you. Now, did I say not to give? No, I never said not to give. Giving and tithing ain't the same thing. Tithing is a tax. That's why you get a tax form at the end of the year from your church that participate in a 501c3 program. Because the church has become a business. The church has become a business. And we going straight to hell. Based on what the church is teaching as a whole. I'm not saying all of them, but as a whole. I mean, it's sickening. It's sickening. But the pastor has something to pass on to his children once he and his wife are no longer able to work or pass on. The two major areas where we show how socialistic we are is in our churches and when we go to the voting booth as a people. For years, I've drawn the same conclusion while trying to find some other reason as to why we keep falling for the same playbooks in both areas. I haven't found another reason yet, so I will stick to what I keep finding. We love our bondage and slavery to people who keep lying to us and slapping us in the face. In essence, we love our slave masters. We keep following the dictates of socialism without even realizing it, because since the days when the abolishment of slavery took place, the former slave masters, who have always been feudalists, socialists, and communists, were trying to figure out how to keep blacks under their thumbs forever. They used abolitionists. They used organizations. They used movements. And they used all of the black leaders they themselves appointed and financed to lead us, and we haven't put two and two together yet. I've said before, and I'll say it again, we love, honor, and revere black leadership that have been placed in front of us by whites. But we reject black leadership who actually have fruit on the tree of their own doing and actually encourage us to do better. I mentioned S.B. Fuller on a lot of my prior videos. I mentioned S.B. Fuller in my book. S.B. Fuller was a black multimillionaire in the 50s and 60s. But he got ostracized by the civil rights crew because he said we as blacks need a better understanding of capitalism. Booker T. Washington was ostracized because he said civil rights were important, but self-help, business ownership, and entrepreneurship were more important. Marcus Garvey said self-help, business ownership, and freedom were more important. Which route do you think would have been more beneficial for us as a people? We can see the route we took and what it's produced. Nothing but pain, heartache, and misery. Proverbs 19:7 says a poor person's relatives avoid or hate him, depending on which translation you read. Even his friends stay far away, the Bible says in Proverbs 19:7. Friends don't even want to be around him. He even runs after his friends, begging. But his friends run away from him. I have a family member, and every time he would come around anybody, he was always asking if he had a couple of dollars. You know, my mentor was here the other day, and you know that family member when he come around, it just became like a conversation piece because everybody was getting tired of him asking for a couple of dollars every time you saw it. You knew you wasn't gonna get paid back, but it just became too much. But my mentor was here the other day, and we were talking about our mentality as a people and why we do everything in our power to avoid business ownership. You see, we don't understand the playbook that's been used against us since the days of slavery. And the playbook hasn't changed. Now, its methods might have changed to fit whatever time frame we were in history, but we were in at the time. But the playbook is still the same. You know, they keep us as black people focused on race and the opposition party and nothing else. And those two issues alone will keep us distracted the whole time while they continue to act like they're the champions for us. See, they act like they're champions for us in public, but behind the scenes, they don't have any plans to do anything for us. I mean, look at them. As Biden met with Ice Cube yet? I cannot get my council person, and it's a woman now, can't get my council person to return calls and emails. The previous councilman couldn't get him to return calls and emails. Can you guess what color they were? I get my congressman's newsletter, but every time I've reached out to his office, you think I got any response? Nope. Guess what all three of them have in common? They're all Democrats. Now, I've reached out to former senators in the state of Texas where I live, all Republicans. I mean, I know it's more than likely not them responding directly. I know it's somebody in the office. But every time I've contacted a Republican, I have gotten a response 100% of the time. 100%. But not one Democrat has ever responded to anything I've reached out to them about. We just don't realize we still have socialists acting as our voice. And we haven't figured out why we haven't advanced as a people while foreigners come in and ignore politicians and build economics. And they blowing us out the water when it comes to economics. Because we keep packing and talking our energy behind political people. And all of them are Democrats. And we keep blaming Republicans for everything that hurts the black community. But when was the last time a Republican controlled your area if you live in a predominantly black area? See, we call them Democrats, but like I mentioned to you earlier, they haven't been a Democratic Party since the days of FDR, before the days of FDR. Because FDR was a Democrat in name only. FDR was a socialist. So the party you call a Democratic Party been a Socialist Party since the 1930s, almost 100 years. Now, isn't it amazing? 1934 was the first time a black got voted into what we thought was the Democratic Party. Isn't that amazing? 1934, I believe it was. First black voted into the Democratic Party at any level. But as I mentioned, the party had already become socialist at the time. See, you got to understand your history. You got to study your history. Stop taking what's being taught you out in history books. I remember when I was in high school, I think I was in 11th grade in a history class. And we got to this era of history, and they showed how man evolved from the ape. Well, the problem with that was I was taught in church when I, going to church in the beginning, because in the beginning is a modern translation. It actually reads, the original Bible reads in beginning, it's not in the beginning, because when you say in the beginning, it's like God started with Genesis, even though Genesis is not the first book of the Bible, Job is. If you say in the beginning, that means God started then. So how could God start then when God started start? If that makes sense to you. But in the book of Genesis, it says God created man. But the socialistic, secularist school system said we evolved from monkeys. So if we evolved from monkeys, why do we still have monkeys? Because we got monkeys teaching us that thought process. I'll talk to y'all later.